Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you know my favorite Justice League character is Cyborg. Yes, sir. Borg life for life. And Cyborg is a very interesting character. If you guys have read any of Cyborg's comics, you will find out he's a very interesting character, actually. And I'm going to just tell you some comics you can check out concerning Cyborg, which are really awesome. And you can go ahead and check out these comics, all right? So as you see here, Cyborg speaking to Batman. Didn't think you were real. Batman says, I'm real when it's useful. Now, recently they said that they're lightening up, especially the tone on Cyborg's character. They say it's a little too dark. I don't know what that means, but Joss Whedon and company, I have confidence in what they're doing. And because I knew that Jeff Johns was overseeing this character and still is overseeing this character in the comics, he's not the one writing the story, but he's overseeing the whole entire Rebirth series. I have utmost confidence that they're going to be doing the right thing for this character, whatever it is. Because if you've read about Cyborg in the comics, for instance, if you read the 2015 version of Cyborg, Man Inside the Machine, you would understand that this Cyborg, if you look at him kind of closely here, and just how he looks here, he does have the features of Cyborg that we will see in the Justice League. Look, the blue eye here, the red eye here. Even the face mask is very similar to Cyborg's face mask. He's got this additional feature. Let me just show you Cyborg here. Here he is. And you can see the additional features here. You see the blue eye here, the eye here. So definitely this Cyborg does resemble quite a lot of this Cyborg. This Cyborg has incorporated a lot of elements from the 2015 Cyborg into him. And when you read about Cyborg, this was the #1 issue of Cyborg in 2015 called Man Inside the Machine. It's very interesting, the questions that are posed about Cyborg, okay? And they are serious questions, and Cyborg's origin is kind of serious. This origin is a little bit different to the origin in the Rebirth series, which is the imitation of life. First it starts off with the prologue, which is very interesting. Again, the dilemma, the question asked in this series, and how the main villain manipulates that question is very, very interesting. And again, Jeff Johns has to do with the Rebirth series that's with Cyborg. So I do believe if they're saying it's a little too dark, they probably know what they're talking about. It's not something to panic about as a DCEU fan. Especially knowing that Danny Elfman's on board with this project and that Joss Whedon's taking this very seriously. So they probably delved into the character and realized we need to dial back on some things. It's a little too heavy for the audience, and it probably was just really too extremely heavy. It doesn't mean that they're not going to give the content for Cyborg, because Cyborg's background is somewhat tragic, is somewhat the dilemma in it, the relationship between his father and himself, pretty much Silent Stone and Victor Stone, is quite an interesting dilemma, okay? And the actor who played Silas Stone, he had to do some reshoots, and they said they were dialing back a bit or lightening up the tone of Cyborg's character, which is a very, very, very delicate balancing act to lighten up the tone of Cyborg. So I think they're going to not really necessarily lighten up Cyborg. You're not going to hear him say booyah and all that kind of crazy stuff. But I think what they're doing is they're going to have Cyborg interact with other players, and there'll be this situational humor to sort of lighten up Cyborg. I think that's what the route they're going. To play off certain things, because his story is pretty deep, and there is a lot of tragedy around Cyborg, and there's a lot of dilemma about Cyborg as well. And from what I'm hearing, where Victor Stone, the actor who plays Victor Stone, is talking about Frankenstein, he continuously uses that phrase Frankenstein. If you guys ever go and explore the Rebirth series, the Imitation of Life particularly, with Cyborg, you will hear the term Frankenstein actually mentioned a number of times by Silas Stone in his accounts. Of course, this is a manipulation by the villain, but that's another story for another day. So it's very important to understand what I'm saying here and how far this goes, and it's very interesting. Cyborg, it really is a very interesting character, and I'm glad he's being explored in the Justice League, and the story centered around him. So it's kind of important, though, I guess, that they make sure they tell the story, but that they don't dissolve it into an abysmal pit, shall I say, that it weighs down the story. pretty much Batman v Superman. The problem with it was it was a heavy story. It was heavy to digest, and the average general audience didn't come to Batman v Superman for that. Okay, when people think of Logan and they went and saw Logan, it was a heavy story as well. There weren't any comical beats per se, and I'm not saying that they're going to lighten up this film by putting comedy into it per se. They may lighten it up other ways, but I do believe that Joss Whedon and Company Limited have realized that it may be too much, it may be too intense for the audiences, and so they'll have to pretty much either offset that with some moments or events in the story where you kind of take a pause or break from it, or they may have to counter or juxtapose it with some humor, situational humor. So they're looking at that, I pretty much think, because Cyborg is going to be the pulse of Justice League. He's going to be the central figure around which Justice League is built. So they have to be careful about it. So I don't expect it, when they say lighten up a bit, I don't expect it to be all stars and gay and slapstick humor and Cyborg saying booyah. I don't expect that. But what I do expect is that there'd be people playing off of Cyborg, and that's where you get probably the humor from it. And this is very important. Humor comes from the same origins as human. And so the fact that there would be some kind of humor in this with Cyborg it can tip the scale to say maybe Cyborg, because Cyborg means human, means fused human and robot, maybe Cyborg is more human than he is robot. So there's this balancing act, because there's the dilemma: is Cyborg human? Is he actually robot? Is he really AI imitating human tendencies? That's the question. And Cyborg has to also figure out that dilemma himself. Now, that may be explored more in another movie, but the point is that we're dealing with that. And we're dealing with heroes who have a lot of baggage behind them. I think the only hero who doesn't have as much baggage behind her is Wonder Woman. Aquaman, does he fit into the world of men? Does he fit into the world of the sea? He's not necessarily accepted by either world. So he has his dilemma, and then you have the Flash. He has his own dilemma he's trying to vindicate his father, and he's trying to get to the bottom of what happened to his mother. And he's got these abilities, but how does that fit into the whole equation? He does not know. So you have to understand, all of these players in this Justice League, they have things going on with them, all right? So just bear that in mind when you're watching the film. Yeah, but this definitely is the character that they're working to get right with audiences, because they want the audiences to feel the complexity, the weight of the character, but they don't want to burden the audiences so far down that you get this schism. And that's what happened with Superman. People were talking about Superman a lot, and people got the wrong notion of Superman. It was a weighty issue, but people it was so weighty for them that they thought Superman was depressed all the time, which was not the case. It was the world's reaction to Superman, and particularly those people who were affected negatively by events that happened around Superman, that they were presenting, making people think that Superman was sad, but he wasn't sad ever. I think the only point at the time when Superman actually was broken a bit was when he went to the Senate, the hearings, to actually work alongside with mankind, and this explosion happened, and he couldn't understand why he couldn't prevent the explosion. And he was wondering what his purpose was, to inspire people. If he's doing the right things, and yet these horrible things are happening as a result of them. So I think that's where he got discouraged a little bit, but he got his bearings back, and he went on to try to save the world. But yeah, a lot of heavy stuff was happening to Superman in that movie, and there was a lot of negative perception of him in the movie, and I think that skewed people's opinion of Superman. Even now, I even hear some really devout DCEU fans saying that Superman, he was a flawed character. Superman's not flawed. Wonder Woman's not flawed as characters. They make mistakes, yes, but they're not flawed characters. These characters have the highest ideals, the highest morals, which we all aspire towards. It's just that they're in the scenery or in worlds. I mean, Wonder Woman did make the mistake and kill the wrong guy, thinking he was Ares, but that doesn't make her flawed. A flawed character is someone who their morality is kind of iffy. Batman was a flawed character because his morality kind of was iffy. He started to go off the tangent. Now, it's a good thing that Batman v Superman was a little bit more brutal than other Batmans and a little bit more stronger because he needs to deal with superpowered beings. And he won't survive against Darkseid if he doesn't. He has to let everything loose. He can't hold nothing back. You heard him in the trailer, in the sneak peek, saying, at some point we've all held back a bit. And he's like, you need to go full gung-ho, full on heavy with Darkseid. You can't hold back nothing. So that's what I got from this thing. But I just wanted to share with you guys the comics again. You can check out concerning Cyborg, why I like Cyborg so much. But, people are not abreast with the comics to start with, and they don't even know how these comic book characters are. But I'm still going to suggest them to you. The Imitation of Life, Part 1, Prologue, and the whole series, which goes on with Cyborg. That's in the Rebirth series. And then you have the 2015. It's not really the New 52, but it is kind of which the Cyborg is based. I think it's mostly New 52 characters you're seeing. Jeff Johns was a part of the New 52 as well. And you can see Man Inside the Machine was the first issue of the New 52 Cyborg. You should really check that out. That was 2015, the year before 2016 when the Rebirth series came out. Check out this Cyborg. It's really an interesting story, and you get wrapped up in it really quickly. So those are two really good readings about Cyborg, his philosophy, his origins. They're a little bit adjusted, the origins of Cyborg. They changed a little bit, especially with reference to his mother. They change a bit with each new iteration of him. But for the most part, it's really interesting, and I really suggest you guys check them out, okay? And you'll see how much I love Cyborg because of that. So on that note, I hope you guys understand even the most recent news about it being a lighter film, that they say it doesn't affect the overall tone of the film. I think it's just it's not so much the content of Cyborg. They're keeping the content, I'm thinking, but I think they're tweaking it so that they can counterbalance the darkness. Because in Wonder Woman, what Patty Jenkins was able to masterly do was she was able to counterbalance the darkness of that movie, which was an incredibly dark movie, actually, Wonder Woman was. But she kept some sort of inspirational hope behind it. And with the Cyborg characters, it's even more tricky because Cyborg, he has certain abilities he's learning, he's developing, and he's growing into. And just that mystery behind Cyborg and how much he's capable of doing, I think that could be the turning point that they use instead of just humor. Because humor is not enough, I think. I think you have to have some sort of inspirational, aspirational attribute to pull people out of the very depressing, very dark backstory to Cyborg. Cyborg has a pretty dark backstory. And the fact that he does not does not express how he feels about certain things, I think that also takes it to another level. And the other darkness that's a problem with Cyborg is he's, like we said, he's kind of like a Frankenstein because he has nowhere to hide. He has nowhere to hide from the world. He has to present himself as this freak of nature. So there's just so much going on there with, Batman. He can be Bruce Wayne. He can take off his mask. Wonder Woman, she kind of hides and veils, and she's this curator lady when she takes off her costume. Cyborg has nowhere to hide. So until he can assimilate humanity, that is, he can actually appear to look like a human and maintain that for a certain period of time, he kind of has to hide in a hoodie and just kind of stay away from the world. So it's going to be very interesting how they couch that so that it's not going to be bright and fuzzy. This Justice League is not going to be a bright and fuzzy film, folks. I try to tell you this over and over. It's going to feel that way in certain parts. You're going to hear people say it was a very hopeful film, like Wonder Woman. It was just filled with hope, and it was so bright, and there are jokes, and you're going to hear them say these stupid things. But truthfully, just like Wonder Woman, and I think to a more deeper extent, more grounded in reality, this film is going to be one in which you're going to feel heroic at the end of this film. But there's going to be these growing pains you'll have to go through with each of these characters. You're going to realize these characters have a lot of issues. And if you can identify with some of these issues, it's going to be a hell of a ride. If you can't identify with them, it's going to be a problem. So that's why Joss Whedon, he's really tweaking this film as much as he possibly can with Jeff Johns. And by the way, for those of you who have not read all of Jeff Johns' material and what he's been overseeing, you would realize Zack Snyder has been dealing with the New 52, yes, but he's been definitely taking advice from Jeff Johns. I heard a lot of people saying, Zack Snyder, he doesn't listen to Jeff Johns. No, he listens to Jeff Johns. Okay, but just that Jeff Johns also, as much as Jeff Johns has complexity in his stories, he does keep that hope symbol there. But Zack Snyder, he's not always clear on the hope symbol message, the hopeful message. He was a little bit more on track, I think, in Man of Steel than he was in Batman v Superman. That's why the audience kind of lost it, because just the way how the film was cut, I got the hope in it. I think a lot of fans and the average person got hope in it. But the critics who were bashing the film and calling it bland and so, for some reason, they missed that because they were not focused in. They weren't dialed into that. They were focused. Zack had people focusing on the different opinions people had of Superman. And like a lot of these critics commented, he never really gave Superman's own perspective except when Superman had doubts. Even though we did get Superman's perspective in the movie, just the way it was cut, you were seeing everybody's perspective on Superman, not so much Superman's perspective on things. Even in the Ultimate Cut, to be fair, Superman, you didn't really get his perspective on things fully all the time, but you did get a lot more Clark Kent's perspective on things. You could see the Boy Scout in Superman, but yet at the same time, it was mostly about other people's perceptions of him, which could, if you're not someone who can stay focused on what's really happening and follow a story, and you need a character to carry you through, most of the critics will say they got Batman's perspective on things. Not really, they didn't really, but that's another story for another day. But they would say they were focused on Batman's perspective on things because you were going through the story with Batman. But you weren't really going through the story with Superman. You were hearing people talk about Superman, but you weren't experiencing what Superman was experiencing all the way through the story. You were seeing what Clark experienced, but not so much Superman. So I get where they're coming from with respect to that. I've never really disagreed with that. I just never thought the movie was a crap movie because of that. I never thought that the movie was, that Superman was this killer or all of that. I never really saw those things. And so as a result, I think Joss Whedon's going to carry through Cyborg's story in a very focused way, and I think that's going to help people to get the story, because Zack has all the ingredients there for people to see. It's just that when he puts it forth, I think Man of Steel gave you more of Superman's point of view of things, but I think Batman v Superman didn't really give you his view of things. It gave you more, except on the pivotal moment when he was discouraged, you got kind of his perspective of things as you sorting things out. And even then, I believe Zack tried to do it in a comic booky nerd way that probably would work better in a comic book because it's a still and people can watch the still, meditate on the still, stay on the page, get it, and then move on. Whereas in a live action, you gotta have to replay the scene a couple times to get it. It was the same thing with the nightmare scene. The nightmare scene and the Flash scene, at first I didn't even understand what the Flash was saying. So I had to actually go and rewatch it. And I'm not saying that that's not something that is awesome, to be able to not get everything and to have to go and rewatch stuff. But I think, especially doing this the first time, I tell you, Zack is a fearless dude. Doing it the first time and having people misunderstand why that scene was very important. And now, while we're getting Justice League now, it starts to make sense. When we get Flashpoint Paradox, it makes sense. I mean, it made sense in the movie to me anyway. But I think, depending on what kind of person you're dealing with, some people will have it dismissive. Some people will be confused, and then they write off the movie because of that. So I think Joss Whedon, he wants to make sure that everybody across the board gets what Zack's saying, because it's there. It's just Joss Whedon, when they say it's too dark, believe you me, Danny Elfman does dark. Okay, you listen to the music from the sneak peek, and you know Danny Elfman was involved in that music. You know it. You know Junkie XL was involved in it too, but Danny Elfman. And I'm hoping that Joss Whedon and they are not severely, I can't see them severely tweaking this thing, man. I just can't see them severely tweaking. I don't see them severely tweaking Zack Snyder stuff. And when they talk about it being lighter, they know what they're saying, because Zack was going for lighter anyway. So I can see how easily a character like Cyborg, for the general audience, even the general might get it, I can see the critics bashing the movie just because of Cyborg's story. So it really is important they get Cyborg right. And I can understand why they're saying they're lightening up the tone on Cyborg. I get it. Because it worked with Justice League. When you look at the Justice League trailer, it's so inspirational, even what Batman's saying. And I'm not saying Zack didn't have a lot to do with that trailer. I'm just saying that what Whedon and Elfman did with that trailer, with the little inputs that they put in, and I tell you, these are little tweaks. It's just little things that get Zack Snyder's movie, everybody on board with Zack Snyder's movie. Because as people say, everything's there in the movie. They say his movies have a lot of potential. They just kind of have this little empty spaces. And Whedon, and what I mean empty spaces, I mean empty spaces in terms of how you feel about the movie. Not necessarily the logic and the reasoning, it's all there. It's the empty spaces and how you feel about it. And I think the Joss Whedon and Danny Elfman, they're going to fill those spaces to give that closure that people need to say, this is a great movie, this is a great movie. I can see them raving about this movie because definitely, I don't know why, I feel comfortable with Joss Whedon on this project after seeing the sneak peek. Because I just truly believe if anything that goes out there, anything they say in the media now, I'm willing to buy after seeing the sneak peek. Because I know that I have a belief that the sneak peek, Whedon and Elfman were involved in that sneak peek. I've never had a reaction to Zack Snyder's film like I almost got a heart attack watching that film, the sneak peek, and I never had that feeling before. So I truly believe Whedon and Elfman are going to do an excellent job on this. I would be highly disappointed if the movie turned out to be something that does not appeal to me at all. I just can't see that happening. I really can't. So I have the utmost confidence in Joss Whedon, like I said before. I have no doubts that they're doing exactly what they need to do to get this film exactly the way it is. It's not going to be like Wonder Woman. I can guarantee you this is not going to be a Wonder Woman because Zack Snyder directed the film to start with. So it's not going to be like Wonder Woman. It's going to be edgy. It's going to be it's not going to be funny. It's not going to be Super Friends. I don't think that. I think it's still going to be dark. I think it's going to be edgy. I think it's still going to have the grit in it. But I have the feeling, I hope, because the villain needs to be threatening, and I'm hoping this is not an Avengers film. For major reasons why we don't want it to be an Avengers film. It's its own property. Will they borrow things from the Avengers film? I'm pretty sure they will. But what I mean to say is that I have this feeling that this is a different kind of movie. We have the heroes who have difficulties. Their backstories are difficult. And I pray God, Whedon and they don't cut out the difficulty of these characters to make people feel that it's just smooth sailing. The point of the DCEU is, in spite of the difficulties, these people overcome these difficulties and they choose to walk certain paths in spite of the hopelessness, in spite of the difficulties around them, in spite of the fact people do not agree with what they're doing and badmouth them or bad label them. That's the point behind the DCEU, which is different to what we've had with the Avengers movies. So I'm really hopeful that stays there at the core and that the situational humor blossoms and grows in the movie, but at the same time that the movie is serious. Like the whole tone of the movie takes itself seriously. It needs to. That's in keeping with every single DCEU movie, not so much with Wonder Woman and Suicide Squad, but still it's in keeping with every DCEU movie. And I know you have to suspend your belief because this is going to start to be intergalactic crap going on, which is now going to kind of go into more fantasy than realism. So I expect that. But I still want it to be grounded. I want to feel tense. I want to feel that their stakes are high here and somebody could die easily. You know, that things can go south really quickly. So that's the feeling that I get from the trailers, and that's why I love these films. And I believe that even though in spite of the news you hear about Cyborg being too dark, especially the story of Cyborg being too dark, I truly believe that they really are going to capture that darkness of Cyborg, the dark story of Cyborg, but I believe it's going to be still with some hint of inspiration somewhere around. They need to keep it counterbalanced. Otherwise, they're going to depress the audience and they're going to disengage from the movie and not like it. So they're walking this very tight rope where they have to be edgy and they still have to have this character go through what he has to go through. Because Cyborg goes through some really hard things that he didn't choose to do. It wasn't his design. He didn't want this. So it's going to be tough, and it needs to be almost difficult. It needs to be harking back to the 90s films in that respect. But they have to balance it, and Whedon's probably working his ass off to try and figure out how to keep that balanced without having slapstick humor or suspension of disbelief, you know, to tone it down. And I'm telling you, the idea behind it is you have to have people around Cyborg who can help that optimism at certain points, and then at certain points using very, very situational humor. I think that's the only way to offset it, because you're walking through Cyborg's shoes, and he's probably going to have the most dramatic character arc of all of the characters there, because it seems as though the story is really riding on him. So I'm hoping that Joss Whedon can get this down, because if he can nail that, if he nails Cyborg, he's got the movie. You know, Cyborg is the key to this movie's success, and Cyborg's that interesting, and most people are saying that Cyborg is the least interesting character you've seen so far in the trailers. They say he's the least interesting character. Love Aquaman, love the Flash, but they are kind of sort of willy-nilly characters. Cyborg seems to be more contained, and that's because he is a machine. So that's what Joss Whedon and they are working on. When they say it needs to be lightened up, it's not so much that they want to lighten up the character as it is. The character is what it is. I think it is trying to get something so people can really like Cyborg, that people can really hold on to. He needs to have a kind of personality without having a personality, because he's more machine than he's human. So they have to find that real fine line to get that people can relate with and get on board with Cyborg's story. Because the key to this, the heart of this story for Justice League, is going to be Cyborg's story. So I think that is really what they're trying to nail, and I think that's what you're hearing when they're talking about lightening up the film, particularly with Cyborg. He's the heart of the film. If they don't get Cyborg right, Justice League's going to flop. It's going to fall away. If they get Cyborg right, and it's a combination of so many subtle things to get this to happen, I don't know if they'll need I'm pretty sure Joss Whedon knows this is an extreme challenge that he has here with Cyborg, because you got to keep him machine, but yet you got to be able to play off that machine and get humor at certain points, situational humor, and then at the same time you got to understand how much of a fine line this is. He doesn't even know how far he is human from machine. He doesn't understand, and he's kind of perplexed about that, and he's evolving as a machine and also as a human. So it's very important to understand this is a serious, dramatic, heavily, almost Frankenstein-based story. It could be Frankenstein, but yet it may not be. It may be a human trapped in a machine. You understand what I'm saying? That's Cyborg. So that's the issue we're dealing with. That's the story we're dealing with Cyborg. So you guys can get it. And that is something that has to be tentatively handled by the director. You know, Zack Snyder has his own opinions about it, I'm pretty sure. And he's going to put them out in the film. And it's up to Joss Whedon now for people to receive that idea and be on board with this character. And that, my friends, is a serious, serious challenge. And that's something Joss Whedon was probably taking very seriously. That's why he didn't come to Comic-Con and all of that. And he's been working those reshoots. I believe he's working mostly with Ray Fisher's character to get that crystallized. And I see people already responding to Ray Fisher's character. But again, the humor comes off of another character responding to Ray Fisher's character, not the other way around. But I believe that as the movie progresses, Cyborg is going to become more comfortable with himself, and I believe you're going to see more of his humanish tendencies. It's kind of like Kit in Knight Rider. If you guys ever seen Kit, Knight Rider, or it's like it's kind of like the movie. Uh, it's kind of like the movie The Matrix, where this program that works for the Merovingian is talking about love to Neo. It's kind of like that. It's kind of like saying, can a machine love or not? Because what is Cyborg? Now we call him Cyborg, but is he more Borg? Is he more Cyborg than he is human Borg? And that's the question that they have to deal with. They have to deliberate with. It's a very complicated character for the DC films. And that's why I love him so much. Because the writers have been able, Jeff Johns and Company Limited, have been able to pull off Cyborg a couple times very well in the comics. Even though he's not the most well-known comic still. I think if they do what they do right, and Cyborg pulls off to be this sleeper, kind of like what happened with Diablo, if they can pull it off right, we're going to have some huge Cyborg fans next Comic-Con. We're going to have a whole bunch of people who are Cyborg. I'm on board already because I read some of the Cyborg comics, so I know what they're going for. And telling you now, it's going to be incredible. It's going to be incredible. I'm so glad Joss Whedon's here because he's going to be able to crystallize what Zack Snyder's been saying. I just wanted to take this long video to be able to explain this to you guys so you guys will get what I'm saying and how difficult it really is to thread that needle through that hole when it comes to Cyborg, okay? So I hope you guys get what I'm saying. It's an awesome character. I would advise you guys, go find the comics, DC Comics, go read up on Cyborg, Man Inside the Machine. Also check out the comics, the Rebirth series, Cyborg, The Imitation of Life, the prologue, as well as the series. It is awesome, and it gives you an idea about Cyborg and about the world Cyborg is in, and the potential for the world Cyborg is in, as well as the players around Cyborg and Star Labs. On that note, you guys have a great one.